Hello, Derrick Gozal. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you, Fuad?
I'm very good too. Let's try this once again, but with bahasa. Apa kabar, Derrick?
Baik, baik. Gimana?
Indonesian usually when asked whether he's good or not, they don't ask back. You do understand the distinction, right? Because most of us, if Indonesian being asked, at least to my own experience,
Hmm.
most of they usually just say something along the line, yeah, puji Tuhan atau syukur alhamdulillah. Most of them don't ask back. Those who ask
Ya,
back usually lived in the west
Jakarta.
part of the world, right?
Ya, ya, ya.
I had a interview, not an interview actually, more like a conversation with one of my friend who live in he's an Indonesian. He lived in the United States, and he do the same thing
Hmm.
like that. No, it's
Like
just,
me,
it's just
like
a
you.
it's just a fine way to distinct how both
Yeah,
culture differs. It has nothing to do with us as a person, but more to do with the with the culture. And I think it's cool to have that kind of distinction.
distinction. Yeah,
um yeah. You were the one who made, if I would use the word correctly, the deconstructing Indonesia movement, right?
well, me and a bunch of, it wasn't just me, it was five of us.
Okay. Okay, but you're the one who volunteered to agree with this conversation.
Right, so now I'm in the spotlight. Yeah, I'll take all the heat.
Oh, good. I hope there will be no hit coming from you. I'm not going to hit you in any way because I think we both have the same concern with this kind of issue. Yeah. So let's start with the first question. Why do you make deconstructing Indonesia?
Yeah, I actually don't even fully remember the exact reason why we started doing this. All I remember was that at some point, a bunch of Indonesian students at Columbia started wondering, oh, it might be a good idea to organize a history or like a politics class on Indonesia. And I was a history major. I'm a really big history fan, and so some of them approached me and, oh, would you be happy to do this? And I was very happy to. I like history. I like teaching, and so slowly from there we just kind of grew. And initially it was very vague, right? It was just, let's just make a history class, let's just make a politics class. But like we really didn't know sort of like sort of what to anchor it in, what specific theme we wanted to cover. And we thought deconstructing Indonesia is a good idea because, again, and as you can see, it's the preface in our website, it's the preface in our first class. We say this all the time. It's sort of Indonesia is Indonesia itself is a concept that's simultaneously simple but also mind-boggling. It's
Mm,
simple because it's simple to define, right? Because you open up a map, there's Indonesia. I'm Indonesian, you're Indonesian. It's very straightforward.
mm,
Uh, but when you start getting into questions like again in our first class, we were like, is rendang Indonesian or Malaysian? And once you start asking questions like that, it's like, okay, they're both kind of there's Malay culture in both. So it's sort of okay. Is it Malay culture that makes Indonesia Indonesia? No, not really. So what makes Indonesia Indonesia? You look at the fact that in our history we have so many kinds of ethnic groups. We have so many different kinds of governments, and they all call themselves Indonesian. And
mm.
so once you start getting into these questions, it sort of becomes a bit tricky. And so I thought we thought like it would be interesting to sort of organize a class where we try to sort of explore a more nuanced picture of Indonesian identity and what it means to be Indonesian, and sort of what historically um, the people who sort of like came up with the idea of Indonesia thought of it, and sort of how they kind of like argued and fought with each other over like what does it mean to be a proper Indonesian.
Oh, yeah, okay. You said that you were a major in history. What kind of history that you were major in? Is it
Yeah,
Indonesian history?
I did it in my I so I majored in history in my undergrad, and so the way they organized the history curriculum where I went was um, they forced us to not specialize, and so they had breadth requirements. For example, geographic breadth, which means that, oh, you have to take classes from at least 4 to 5 different regions of the world. There's also chronological breadth, which is sort of does the same thing but with time. So not just modern history. You need at least one or two ancient history stuff. So it was they made it purposely very, very broad and non-specialized. So it was kind of all over the place.
I see. Before we get into the deconstructing Indonesia movement, I want to get a little um, geeked out with you first because I also
Okay.
a massive nerd in Indonesian history, especially.
Okay,
First
good, good.
question. First question.
Yeah.
What is your most favorite
Easy
Nusantaran
quiz.
era?
My favorite Nusantaran era. Well, because it's what we're covering right now in the class. I'm like, I've been kind of into the Kebangkitan Nasional to Merdeka era, so like the 1900s to 45. I think that's a very interesting period. But I'm kind of like maybe that's just a momentary thing. That's what we're covering right now in the class. So now I'm just like deeply focused and invested in that period. And so it's quite interesting. And yeah, I mean that is really like if you're sort of unpacking Indonesian identity and sort of deconstructing Indonesia or even constructing Indonesia, right? This is
Hmm.
basically the formative period. And you once you actually get into the history, you it's kind of surprising where it's coming from. The sources are not what you'd expect sometimes.
Oh, right. So, in my part, my
Yeah.
most favorite Nusantaran era is Sriwijaya.
Oh, Sriwijaya. Okay. Yeah.
Sriwijaya. I think Sriwijaya is massively underrated and way
Hmm.
more
Hmm.
too overpowered uh, um, when compared with Majapahit. People always think that Majapahit was the
Really?
golden age of Nusantara, but in my own point of view, it's Sriwijaya. There are a lot of reasons as why. I think I'm going to make my own a content explaining why first why Sriwijaya is the OP and why Majapahit is
It's overrated.
extremely overrated. Yeah. So, who's your favorite historical person in
Wait, why?
Nusantara, and
I'm
why?
curious.
Oh.
I'm curious though. Why do you think Majapahit is overrated? It's not to take us on a tangent, but
Of course, I'm happy to answer it because the first thing is because most of their historical sites only extend so far to only the central part of Java. There is a late Majapahit era temple around here. I'm actually in Solo right now.
mm,
There's that, and then the cultural influence that the Majapahit had, as far as I know, is only extends away far into Bali right now. That's still
mm,
surviving. At the other hand, okay, I'm getting a little bit way too geeked out right now. This is supposed to be me interviewing you, but okay. At the other hand, at the other hand,
okay.
Sriwijaya at that time, which was around fourth century CE, no, fifth to sixth century CE, already made trading. Already made trade
Hmm.
with the Madagascars, with the Africans.
Yeah,
That shows
yeah.
their advanced sailing technology, which is something cool. I think. I mean,
Yeah.
the the European only made such technological advancement in the 15th century, and it was because of the Ottoman sealed the trading route from land, so they have to find another way to the sea, right? I mean, I think
Mm,
that's very cool. I think that's very cool. And the other thing is because this is there is actually some cool story that I heard this from a writer, not a writer. Yeah, he's a writer, Paul Michel Munoz. He said in his book that the Borobudur temple was made by the Srivijayan dynasty. I think that's something cool because if you consider something like that, Majapahit didn't made a lot of temples that even surviving until today. They have the Trowulan site, but
mm,
in my
mm,
own opinion, it's not as grand as the Borobudur. The last thing is
mm.
something we call about my own racist bias because Srivijayan is
Okay.
Sumatran, I'm a Sumatran, so
Sumatran. That
so
makes
that's that.
sense. I There's this distinction often drawn. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'm sure you are, where it's sort of like Majapahit is sort of like is Javanese and more land based, and
Yeah.
Srivijaya is sort of the maritime power. And so it's sort of like I guess you're more of a land and sea, right? And it's sort of I'm guessing you're more of a sea guy. So it sounds
I
like
I'm 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 more of a sea guy.
okay.
Uh, so here's the thing. I think the songs that we have, Nenek moyangku seorang pelaut, our ancestor
Mhm.
is a seafaring guy. I think it tells a
Yeah,
lot about our own history. I mean,
yeah,
we are island people, right? I mean, we live in
yes,
island. we should embrace that identity. What do you think about that?
Identity.
Yeah, we go way off a tangent, but I think this is still a very good discussion to have.
Right, it's so pertinent. I'm neither Javanese nor Sumatran. I'm Chinese, so I don't think I have any racist bias towards your land. but um, but no, I think you're absolutely right. I think in the sense that historically, Java is not. I don't think Java is really unique as a land-based sort of. The Javanese empires are
Mm.
not very unique as a land-based sort of polities because you have them all over the place across the world and in many different sort of continents and in different contexts. Uh, but when it comes to maritime powers, Nusantara is has always been unique because of its position geographically. It's midway between East Asia, South Asia, and the Middle
Mm.
East. It stands
Yeah.
beside them, and because of the Straits of Malacca, like everything has to pass through there. And so I think you're right in that sense, in that Java as a land power it's just one land power amongst many, but
Mm.
sort of the maritime nature of Nusantara is for the most part unique. And even today, it's sort of you can still see that it's not in Indonesia, it's in Singapore, right? That's sort of the
Yeah.
entrepot, the Straits of Malacca, but it's still the same thing. It's still the same sort of like historical geographical pattern reasserting itself.
Yeah. Okay, it's hard for me to not get into much more racist mode
Maybe,
from now on.
maybe we should stop ourselves. Yeah.
Maybe we should stop. Just one more thing. Just one more thing. I think the Singapore as a country, okay, as a country, not as a civilization, got it lucky. They, although it's not about it's not necessarily about luck, but much more about
Yeah.
it's supposed. I just want to say that it's supposed to be us, the Nusantaran. I'm not saying Indonesian. Yeah? I'm saying
Yeah.
Nusantaran.
Yeah.
But then again, here we are right now, right? Okay. Let's reserve this for my own
So what a time.
fan exclusive writing, so they know how. It's not about racism; it's about bias.
Yeah. That's probably the word we should have been using instead of racism from just
Yeah.
now.
Um, uh, yeah. Okay. Fuad, you should stop speaking about this. But okay, let's ask. I asked you about who's your favorite historical Nusantaran figure. Who, if any?
I've never. The embarrassing thing is I've never thought about this. I've never actually thought about this. Who is my favorite Nusantara favorite? Hmm. Yeah, ask me again later. I'll
Okay.
have to think about that a bit
Okay.
more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just a hint. One of my most favorite Nusantaran figure, of course, Bung Hatta. I think he's one of the coolest
Mm, yeah.
intellectual Indonesia ever had. B.J. Habibie,
Yeah.
of course, a very cool man, full of aura. I mean, like, wow, right?
Aura. Yeah.
He's the only one who aura farms without doing any aura farming. I mean, like, he's very
That's what
cool.
we're.
I mean, and
Habibi, yeah, yeah.
then,
They're both
uh,
Sumatrans too. Wait, is
no,
Habibi
Habibie
Sulawesi?
Makasaris.
Asar, ya, kan?
Sulawesian, yeah. Hatta is Sumatran, and no, I
Sumatran.
choose him not because he's Sumatran. Okay, this one. Okay. All right. Okay. So the other one is Diah Gitarja, the mother of Hayam Wuruk, the third
Yeah.
Majapahit emperor. I think she's the archetypal warrior princess. In a
Mm,
sense, and
yeah.
she led whole army consisting the great Gajah Mada and Arya not Arya Wiraja. Aditya Warman, both are great generals. I think the fact that she could lead two great generals in her own army shows how cool she is, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, you should come to me at our next conversation, or maybe just message me, having your own
Wait,
list on
actually,
why.
I think I
Okay,
know. I have one. I have one. Ki Hajar Dewantara.
Ki Hajar
Uh,
Dewantara.
Ki
Okay,
Hajar
why?
Dewantara. Um, it's so again, it's like with preparing for the class, I've been like enmeshed with reading a lot of like pamphlets, a lot of political texts, and I really like Ki Hajar Dewantara's writings. I haven't even gotten to his educational writings, but just his writings on sort of there's this pamphlet, Andaikah saja saya seorang Belanda, if I were a Netherlander, and that's really good. It's such a good piece. It's a sarcastic polemic essentially, where he's like, it's like okay, the setting is sort of the Dutch are trying to hold Independence Day celebrations in the Indies. At the time, it was the Indies because it wasn't Indonesia yet. And it was sort of celebrating the Dutch's own independence from the Spanish, which they sort of fought in the 17th, 16th century. I think that was sort of the time period. And then Kiajar comes in. He writes this, polemic, and he says, if I were a Netherlander like you guys, I'm a patriot too, so I get it. I would be singing the Wilhelmus, the Dutch national anthem, Horse. I would sort of feel proud to look at the Dutch flag. I would join you all in the celebration. But it's kind of ironic, right? Because you don't let
Mm.
us do the same thing. And then he goes into all of this like, yeah, it's like it's so offensive to the natives to do this on their own land. And then he's like, but what do I know? I am not the Dutchman. I'm just a brown guy. What can I say? I don't know. It's such a great piece.
And how did the Netherlands respond with that paper?
I think they eventually threw him in jail.
As always, right?
Which is always what happens. So.
Okay, let's get to the deconstructing Indonesia part. What do you mean deconstructing when you refer to deconstructing Indonesia?
Yeah. So sort of in the most concrete sense, there are many ways we can understand Indonesia. Or to put it simply, like sometimes if you notice like debates, for example, back home, you'll have people on very opposing sides of the political spectrum, or like they'll have very different views on like all sorts of political and social issues. Some of them are pro democracy, some of them want to go back to the 45 constitution and have it more, which is a bit more authoritarian. Um, and you have people who have different views on the role of religion in Indonesia, but all of them will very often couch their arguments with sort of this language of demi NKRI, because this is more Indonesian than the other. And so it's an inherently interesting thing, right? Like, in content wise, topic wise, these things are so different. And sometimes opposed to each other, but they all sort of like coexist under this umbrella of Indonesia. And so, how does that come to be? There's something that's unifying them, but also something, quite vague in this unifying sort of element that all of these disparate things can come, like congregate under it. And so, we just thought that's sort of like where we started off really with, if this thing can like contain so many strands underneath it, it might be valuable to start deconstructing these strands and see like all of these different currents, because sometimes like the conversations about these things get overly reductive, right? It's like there's only one right way to be Indonesian. It's like, if you don't agree with that, you're sort of not, you're like not a true Indonesian or whatever. And I think having this sort of like idea of, and sort of deconstructing this idea, I think helps us bypass those oversimplistic narratives and helps us regain the nuance. And I mean, you're a history buff. I mean, it's always more nuanced than we popularly imagine.
So what is your end goal with the deconstructing Indonesia?
Yeah, I think, to be fair, look at, there's five of us. We all come into this with like different like perspectives and different like goals. Me personally, I just like talking about history, and so anytime I get a chance to talk about history, I just talk about history. That's sort of my selfish motivation. And the reason, and again, it's sort of like I guess like why specifically deconstructing Indonesia is sort of like in my sort of like what I previously said about like sort of reclaiming a more nuanced understanding, not just of our own history, but sort of like how we understand ourselves. Because it's sort of like that's sort of like the lodestone that we use to sort of guide how we act as a society, as a country, and also like it's sort of what we use to when we want to get people to do things we want, like coercion, right?
Hmm.
Or even sort of like someone wants to promote a policy, someone wants to support a political program, someone wants to suppress a group. The idea of Indonesia is often wielded and weaponized, and I think it's a powerful idea. And anything, something that powerful should be understood. It shouldn't be something that just it's like if you have if you have an atom bomb,
Hmm.
you should damn well know how it works before you use it. I'm
Hmm.
not saying Indonesia's an atom bomb, but sort of it's a potent weapon. There should be a manual, kind of.
I, I really like your quote right there. Something that's so powerful must be understood. And yeah, I'm going to steal that one from you. But I will quote you on that. Yeah. Can I summarize it with a sentence like this? Um, to understand, to know about the nuances of Indonesia is the goal in and of itself. Can I say it like that?
Yeah, I think that's one way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because in my own part, I consider myself as a philosophy content creator that expands about the ideas that philosophy could expose. My own goal is always about letting people know that there are ideas like this, and I'm not going to tell you what to do, and I'm not going to tell them what to think. I'm just telling them
Right.
these are the consequences of those ideas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Uh,
Or at least know that like there are other ideas out there. Sort of the marketplace is always wider than we think
yeah.
it really is.
Yeah, yeah. I think the goal of knowledge as its own entity is grossly underrepresented and underrated. I think
Mm,
to give people knowledge, I think it's the best thing and the easiest thing, in my own opinion, we can do.
mm,
We,
mm,
we don't
mm.
we, we don't want them to have some kind of ideas or some kind of ideology coming out from
Yeah,
learning from us. I think
yeah,
that's not our
yeah.
business in doing that, right? Yeah. Okay, that's so cool. Okay. Next question. What are the histories of Indonesia that you think are misrepresented or scarcely educated?
Yeah. Um, I would say even so, like in most historiographical, like in most like modern historiography, the method is you sort of go the gold standard is you go to the primary texts, which is sort of you don't read the textbook, but like if you like training to be an actual historian, and say you're studying say the War of Independence in 45, 49, 45, um, you don't start with a textbook. You start with Sukarno's speeches. You read a report directly written by TB Simatupang. That's what we mean by primary sources. And oftentimes we don't really do this, and so we lose so much when we don't do this. Kartini is such a great example. Um, it's everyone, and I think she's a great example because everyone knows about Kartini, and
Mm.
Kartini is sort of like commercialized almost, right? It's like it's like you want to sell a kabaya, oh Kartini. It's like women,
Yeah.
it's like oh Kartini. It's like feminism, oh Kartini. But you don't actually read Kartini, and if you read Kartini, she's fucking impressive. Like the way she writes, the way she's thinking, and then when you do that, and this gets to sort of what you were saying about with sort of what is missing and what we don't know about, surprising nuances come out. For example, that Kartini's position, Kartini wasn't just pushing for education. She was sort of someone who grew up, who was brought up in a Dutch educational milieu. She was deeply steeped in Dutch education and in Western sort of ideals. And she used this to attack both traditional Javanese society, and from Kartini's angle, a lot of it had to do with them being quite patriarchal, um, but also the Dutch, because in sort of and she wasn't as she wasn't as confrontative and as direct as her successors like Ki Hajar or Cipto Mangunkusumo or any of the Indisch party members really. But the critique was there, where she was like, you consider yourself higher than us, but you consider yourself enlightened. You see us as a backwards, as a feudal people, but you know, you still enjoy it when Javanese people sungkem to you. You don't know what it means and you enjoy it anyway. And that's surprising, I think, right? Because that angle of like you're not just attacking the Dutch, you're also attacking traditional society, and there's this sort of like tension between like I'm not I I'm sort of a Dutchified Javanese. I I don't really relate to traditional Java anymore. But at the same time, I I use these intellectual tools to sort of be critic. I'm also using these intellectual tools from the West to be critical of the West, and in this case, it was the hypocrisy of the Dutch, and that nuance is lost because oftentimes it's a simple story of Indonesia against the Dutch. It's more complicated than that. It's what like I forgot it was Ariel Haryanto or Pram who said that like this was a budaya gado-gado. It was like a
Yeah.
mix of all of these things. And I think that nuance is often lost. That nuance is often lost for like very simplistic us and them, Indonesian versus sort of Dutch arguments. And again, that goes back to what we were saying about deconstructing Indonesia, right? It's sort of there's so many fine layers just within this sort of both within the idea and the actual like social phenomenon that is Indonesia.
Why the nuances lost?
Mm, yeah, all sorts of reasons. I think. I mean, I think we're both sort of like we talked about this in the first class where Indonesia, the Indonesian education system is very much obsessed with memorizing.
Ah, yeah. Okay, that's one thing.
um, yeah. Why this is the case? That's a whole other conversation about educational policy. But the education system itself is so focused on memorizing, and that's bad for every field. But it's especially damaging for history, because history. When we talk about this in the first class, where there's a difference between history and chronology. And chronology is the stuff that we all have PTSD about, which is what we learned in high school and middle school, right? It's sort of
Yeah.
like, it's like, okay, what was the year the Java War started? What was the year Pangeran Diponegoro was born? Or the year that? I mean, all of this is just, it's a selection of facts that you bookmark based on their time and you arrange them like linearly. And that's a chronology, but really we don't really give a damn about chronology. That's what the questions are. I mean, they're important in their own way, but like ultimately, that's not what we're here for. Like we're not here to ask when Pangeran Diponegoro was born. We're here to ask like, okay, if he was born in his date, what were the people around him like? What was he born to? What were the debates going around him? What were sort of the big issues that everyone around him were talking about that he absorbed, and why did he end up taking the side that he took? Why did he end up having the ideology, having the beliefs that he did? That's history, and memorizing doesn't get you there. Memorizing just gives you chronology. History sort of like fills in the blanks. History, like chronology, like arranges the facts. The facts are sort of like in terms of like when things happen. History is why we give a damn. History is when we start asking, why did this happen? What is the significance? And you don't really go there. You just stop at memorizing dates and names.
How much involvement the colonials had in shaping our understanding of our own historical
Mm,
knowledge?
that's a very good question. I don't know how in depth of an answer I can give. Maybe one thing I can say, because I'm currently reading, and we we sort of hinted at this already with our discussion on Kartini, and sort of applies to like all of the
Yeah.
nationalist figures of that time. They were deeply steeped in Western educational sort of ideas, right? Um, if I right now we're in the upcoming class, we're going to be talking about Indonesia Mengugat, which is Soekarno's landmark speech. It's one of sort of like the big political manifestos of Indonesian independence. And in the first segment, where he critiques and deconstructs Dutch colonialism, he basically does it from an economic perspective. And he sort of like, it's an anti-capitalist, it's an anti-imperialist critique. And he was sort of, he was in court. He's defending himself against the Dutch. What's astonishing is that as he sort of goes through this like critique, he
Mm-hmm.
keeps quoting Dutch academics, no, not just Dutch, so European academics. So he's like Otto Bauer, the socialist. This other guy called Trollstra, I think. And he just keeps quoting these guys, and then as you work through the text, you realize that like, yeah, that's the most direct imprint, right? Even the ideas of the nationalist movement, the ideas of the independence movement itself was absorbed from what people like Sukarno, what people like Hatta studied in sort of their sort of like these Dutch educational institutions. It wasn't just the Dutch that affected them. Like, and there's a lot. I mean, this has been sort of under. It's only in the past few decades that it's sort of being more appreciated more in the research. Another influence is sort of Islamic modernist circles from the Middle East, where you have more and more Indonesians going on the Hajj, and they sort of like absorb these ideas, and they sort of like use these to sort of inform how they saw their identity as a sort of like independent Indonesians. But that's sort of a tangent. At the moment, like that's sort of the most direct imprint. There's also a few academics. I forgot their names. Partha Chatterjee. I think that's one of them. I think he's a post-colonial scholar at Columbia, but I might be wrong. I don't fully. I might be getting the details wrong. He basically argues very convincingly that the post-colonial state would not have existed without the colonial state. The post-colonial, that's sort of the
Oh yeah.
paradox, right?
Mm.
That's sort of the paradox where it's sort of it is a reaction against the colonial state. It seeks to break free of the colonial state, but it's sort of conceived of itself through the framework of the colonial state. And I think one of the ways it does that is in the idea of a state itself. It borrows the idea of like a modern state from the colonial states themselves.
Hmm.
uh, and so that's sort of like a couple of examples.
Give me a percentage. How much accurate do we think right now, all Indonesian
Mhm.
people? How much accurate do we perceive our history? 100% is being the
Oh,
most accurate.
yeah. It's probably a very low number. Maybe like there's like there's like there's inaccuracy, but there's also incompleteness,
Okay.
right? It's sort of like there's so much that people don't even know. So it's not
Mm.
even accurate or inaccurate. People just don't know,
Mhm.
and I think that's like a lot. I think that's like probably 95%. I would guess. Again, if you think of history as chronology, yeah, you know the basics. But I don't think that's what's important about history. And so once you get into that territory, I think it starts becoming the absence of that becomes quite glaring. Inaccuracy. Uh, I would say at least 50%. I would say pretty big.
50%.
I'm just guessing here.
Yeah,
I don't know where I'm pulling these numbers from, but
yeah. Right. So my question is, how can we drive up the number from 50% to like 70%, or maybe just a little bit lower but higher than 50%? What do you think that we should do?
yeah, yeah. Well, you'd have to ask Nathan. He's the educational
No, I'm
policy
going to
guy.
ask you right now.
um, I well, there are well the if we're looking at if you're looking at things at a societal mass scale, like not just like in terms of micro solutions, but tingkat masyarakat. Like, how do we do this en masse? Well, the elephant in the room is the educational system itself,
Right.
and you start with all of the structural deficiencies, and the structural deficiencies are big because sometimes the basic questions, basic stuff is still left hanging. For example, like there's so many teachers, especially outside of the big cities, where you know they're paid so poorly that they have to take up 2 to 3 side jobs. So obviously they're not going to be teaching optimally, or even basic stuff like kids, you want to go to school, you don't have proper classrooms, you have to sort of like cross 3 rivers without a bridge, and it's sort of like, and those are extreme examples, but in many parts of the country, a lot of these basic things aren't even quite in place yet. And so I would say, like, again, if you wanna, and this isn't just for history, this is for every, this is even true for like teaching math,
Mm.
right? Or like science. It's you just structurally the educational system is a very leaky ship, and you kind of have to like focus on these very basic well, I don't want to be Eurocentric. Let's not say bread and butter. Like what? Beras dan nasi dan sambal, nasi dan sambal issues.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about Indonesian government. We are not going too deep in this one, but I want to know your thought about the Indonesian government. What do you think about the current Indonesian government?
But the current government,
Yeah, yeah.
um, I haven't. Yeah. So obviously, the angle that I'm most familiar with is with history, because that's sort
Mm-hmm.
of like what we cover in class, and sort of there's the recent attempt to sort of um, to sort of write an official history book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I don't know if that's a good idea. Um, yeah, and there's just, I don't know. It's just lately, I think I first became conscious about political things. I started reading the news more when I was 23, 22. I guess when I graduated from undergrad. I mean, undergrad I read a bit, but like I was still like kind of like this. I was just trying to survive school, I think. And life, it's sort of like you know, friends, girls, depression, that sort of. I mean, that hasn't changed, but sort of like you learn to sort of like see other things too. Uh, and I think over the past several years, I haven't seen as much dissatisfaction
Mm.
about now. I would say, like the amount of protests that you see, the amount of um, like backlash that you see, sort of the amount of um, confrontation that you see. I think there's a sense wherever you stand. I think there's a sense deep down that things aren't quite headed in the right direction. That we're sort of like, at the very least, that we're moving away from calm waters and sort of into sort of like the more turbulent waters of history. Um, and so that's sort of like my sense of things.
And how does that make you feel as an Indonesian?
Sad, worried, and I think the thing that's sort of like kind of makes it more depressing for me is that it's not just. I don't think it's a solely Indonesian thing. It's like
Mm.
you look everywhere else, this malaise, this phenomenon, this sense that like things are just breaking in real time. Is just it's so palpable. Um, like I think I've been in New York for the past 3 years, and I think the thing that like gets to me the most is, or like one of the things that gets to me that is really striking is it doesn't snow as often anymore. It doesn't
Yeah.
snow like winter comes like the white stuff doesn't fall from the sky. You could have a winter where you have one day of snow and that's it, which is crazy. I mean, we've all watched. I don't know if you watched Home Alone or any of those
Mm.
American New York Christmas movies, but it's striking. Extreme weather events are getting worse. Subway was underwater last week. We canceled class because of that. And I remember I was getting a lot of like WhatsApp messages like, I didn't know New York could flood. Yeah, yeah, it floods pretty bad. So and that's just the elephant in the room, right? With global warming, but there are all sorts of things with like very specific uh, versions of that in every country. That is just it just feels like it's happening everywhere.
Okay. This might sound like a very hard question, but
Mm.
what do you think the part that deconstructing Indonesia could take in changing the situation that Indonesia now have?
Yeah. Um, I mean, like you said, it's always knowledge for its own sake is always better.
Mm.
And again, like Indonesia, well, we talk about how Indonesia is a very powerful tool, right? It's like a very powerful weapon sometimes. It's also our lived reality. It's sort of this very big, complex house building ship that we're on. And again, it should come with a manual.
Mm.
And the more nuanced your understanding of history, the better this manual that you have. And I mean that's a sort of like I mean that's one way to look at it, right? Sort of like there's sort of the banal argument that's sort of like, oh, the history teaches you about it. I don't think it's just that though. I don't think it's just you learn about the past and then now you know better how to predict things and stuff like that. I think we mentioned this in the first class too about how the idea of an objective history is very loaded. You can have an objective chronology that's very straightforward. Like, yeah, World War II happened. Indonesia achieved independence. It was ruled by the Dutch. Those were facts. You can sort of like put them on like a timeline. But an objective history, that's a bit more tricky, right? Because now you're asking questions like, okay, why did this happen? What did these people think? Why does it matter to us? And I think that's a key word. That's a key sentence. That's a key phrase. Why does it matter to us? Um, and that's tricky because it's sort of when we're asked that question, we all inevitably project in our own different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and so that becomes very fraught. But it's nothing. There's nothing bad about it. It's just the nature of the thing in itself, right? We do this in our everyday lives. Like I can construct a chronology of my life. I was born on this date. This and this and this and this and this happened. I also do history with my own life. When I ask, why did I do this when I was 22? Did I do the right thing? Maybe you might do it for someone else. It's like you think about your parents. Oh, why did my parents do what they did? What like what were they going through in this period of their lives, and you try to think about these things, right? That's also a kind of history that we're doing, but for ourselves. And history in the classroom is just the same thing, but you just expand it across space and time. And I think when you do that again, you don't necessarily have you're not necessarily better at like predicting things or like being a more pragmatic person, but you sort of become more human in a way. It is a thing that is like self-satisfying in itself, and it's sort of to link it back to Indonesia. It makes you more. Hopefully, it makes you more open. It makes you more sympathetic. It makes you realize that like your story, what you thought was Indonesia, might not be the only one out there. There's many, and again, really, it's Indonesia still exists. It's a story that's still being written. It's not over yet. History doesn't just end. It just keeps going. Even if the human race gets wiped out, like it's like geological history keeps going.
Yeah.
The history of the universe keeps going. So it's like
It's kind of interesting the way you approach history is almost the same way I approach philosophy.
Mm.
Maybe because before I actually learned about philosophy, I learned history first. I think there is a lot of philosophical points that we can harness from
Yeah.
historical facts, and
Yeah.
um, the idea about history itself is full of philosophy. It's full of meaning. I mean, like one of my
Yeah.
greatest question about our existence is to know everything, and the fact that I cannot know what my parents ate yesterday.
Yeah.
At one time in my life, I find it stressful because I cannot know
Really?
that. If that's one, yeah, if that one simple thing we can know, then what are the other things that we
Heard the other
couldn't know
things.
either? And it drove me in a very long and depressing existential problem about that. So so and then at one point I moved on. I spoke with a lot of fellow philosophers talking about this existential problem, and then slowly getting over it. I'm slowly getting over the fact that yeah, we are human. That our humanity comes with our own ignorance, our inability to know everything. The best we can do is try to make sure that our
Right.
future is not as bad as our current position. That's the thing I
Yeah.
learned from speaking
Yeah.
with a lot of
Yeah.
philosophers.
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
enjoy the word, the quote that Yuval Noah Harari said. Yeah. I know he's not very popular in real academic settings, but he did say something along the line of we learn history to not repeat the mistakes our past made. He said something along that line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you agree with that kind of quote, right? What do you
For the
think
most
about
part,
it?
yeah. For the most part, yeah. I think that's like one layer of history.
Mm.
But and I don't. It's the most obvious layer that people often deploy. Which is sort of like, yeah, it's this very like pragmatic argument, right? Of course, you learn the past. It's sort of like, it's like when you're hiring someone, you look at their resume and it's like, okay, they have 10 years of experience. That's like 10 years of history. So probably they won't. It's the same idea. Um, so I don't disagree with it per se. I do think that it's only one layer of history, and the other is like what we were just talking about how it's something. There's something intrinsic about it, with how you sort of learning history is like learning about life. It's like learning about ourselves, about society, and not just society as an abstraction, like society as like a thing you live in. Um, it's. I think history's close cousin isn't just philosophy, isn't just the social sciences. It's also literature. It's also the arts. There's something like, I think that's quite deeply humanistic about it, where sort of, I think it kind of transcends this very like pragmatic. I mean, again, the pragmatic element is part of it. Where you're learning things to um, to sort of like predict things better, or like sort of like learn from the past. But there's also something that's intrinsic, like something you do for its own sake, a final end, to use an Aristotelian.
Final. Okay. Okay. Last question for you. This has been a very great conversation, and I really like the part where we get into deep in philosophy because most of philosophical studies in I don't know maybe in the in the whole world rarely touch
Yeah.
on historical things.
Mm.
They always see philosophy, the history of philosophy, not
Right, like the philosophy of history.
not the philosophy of history. What can we learn
Yeah,
from that?
yeah, yeah.
What are the meaning that we can take from all this? So yeah, just one last question for you. What do you love most about Indonesia?
What do I love most? Uh, hmm, food is probably up there.
Same.
It's hard to beat. It's
Mm.
really hard to beat. Food is probably up there. Just the sheer variety you have, uh, sheer flavor. I
Mm.
don't think there's a lot of cuisines as flavorful as Indonesian cuisine. Um, Yeah, I think food. Food, yeah. Well, that's what I miss most, aside from like my friends and family back home. But the food. Yeah, I
So,
mean, yeah.
mhm.
And it's not
Yeah,
the traffic. It's not. I mean, I'm from
yeah,
Jakarta, so like traffic's a big thing I deal with back home.
yeah. At when I read the questions, I was thinking you say something about the potential that we have as Indonesian people, and then when we had the conversation for like 50 minutes, I kind of predict that you will say something about the food. I was thinking that you say rendang or nasi goreng, but yeah, food in
Yeah.
general in
In
Indonesia is.
general. Well, it's not just rendang, it's not just nasi goreng. It's like
Mhm.
I miss everything. It's
Yeah, I
yeah.
can imagine that. I can imagine that feeling. I originated from Medan. I
Hmm.
live quite far from my hometown, and in a lot of way I miss the cuisine there. Ikan
Yeah.
goreng sambal. That's my favorite food.
Yeah.
Um, Daun ubi tumbu. I'm a
Mm,
Bataknis, so yeah, that's what my favorite food. And I can already imagine me just like 2,000 kilometers away, and then you like I don't know, 20,000 or 40,000 kilometers away from home. I can
2000. Yeah.
I could understand the feeling that you missed all the food.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you can taste the Indonesian food.
I hope so too.
So,
Yeah.
without having to worry about the flood and all the political power problems there.
Yeah. Yeah. In Lombok, I remember Lombok. You're in Lombok right now, right?
Yeah, I still stay in Lombok.
Okay. I'm only familiar with ayam taliwang
Oh,
from
yeah,
Lombok.
it's a very good food.
Yeah.
I enjoy ayam taliwang, but you should if you go to Lombok again, you should try nasi puyung. It's
Oh, I haven't had that.
it's ayam goreng, fried chicken with Indonesian signature sambal, but they have it more spicy. We Indonesian love spicy
Okay.
food, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
you
we
should try
do.
that one too. You should try that one
Okay. Okay.
before all of the travel agency always provide you with all of Western food, and then all
Mm,
the local food degraded into something like traditional, or maybe we have to go to deep territory within the Lombok the Lombok to justify that kind of food, because that's the ironic thing about tourism, right? Either either our own food become something exotic, or it drove away from the main tourism sites. That's one of the thing about tourism. But yeah,
it's sort of like the nasi goreng. It's sort of like the nasi goreng hotel effect, right? It's like even if you have the same local dish in a very touristy place, like it's like nasi goreng. It's like you have to eat it with abang-abang, like in pinggir jalan.
yeah.
But if you eat it in a hotel, it doesn't taste good. It's the same thing with like tourism. Even if you still have the ayam taliwang, it's the moment it gets into an air conditioned restaurant, it doesn't taste the same.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the thing. Yeah. Okay. That's about it. Thank you very much, Derek.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you.